Someone pick up the phone because I called it. Nintendo Switch 2 did extraordinarily well in December. Nintendo Switch 2 led the hardware market both in unit and dollar sales during December and the 2025 year, helping offset year-on-year declines across other platforms. So basically what happened is that the industry noticed that PlayStation and Xbox sales have tanked this year, that they've gone down, that they've plummeted through the floor, that they've hit rock bottom, and they tried to create this narrative that the Nintendo Switch 2 was doing just as badly. I can't begin to tell you how many times we heard that the Switch 2 was doing poorly, that games were bombing, that nothing was coming out for it, that this thing was a complete disaster. And meanwhile, in reality, every time we get actual numbers, they're outpacing the Switch 1. They're doing extraordinarily well, and the console is successful. Like, that's been very, very evident for a long time, but every month, it feels like, we have a new cope from the community. You know, last month, it was like, you know, the narrative was that, like, no, the Switch 2 sales numbers collapsed over the holiday season, you know, and, like, you know, this, recently, it was like the stock price thing. You know, both of which, as I've explained to you on this channel, was nothing more than a gigantic cope. Okay? The gaming community is very desperate to keep up the facade that the Switch 2 is a failure, to try and deny reality, to create the illusion that PC gaming is super successful and that Nintendo is a perpetually failing brand. You know, doomed since 1889. Okay, like, it's this kind of situation that has led to that becoming a meme. Is that every single console generation, we have to go through this. We went through this with the Switch 1, actually. Like, until Super Smash Bros. Ultimate came out, everybody kept screaming about how the Switch 1 was this disaster that wasn't doing the numbers it needed, you know? It was like, it was a gigantic cope for a very, 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 very long time. And now we're seeing the same thing again with the Switch 2. Even worse, honestly. And one of the things I want to ask, you know, going into this, now that we have like some more reliable hard numbers, you know, as to how much Nintendo Switch 2 actually sold over this holiday season, are we going to see retractions from any of these YouTubers? Is Review Tech USA going to apologize? Are there going to be like any, like, you know, actual, is anyone going to actually address this or bring it up? Like, no. Like, they're going to write it off. They're going to say the numbers aren't good enough. They're going to say that Nintendo is doomed, as always. You know, they're just going to turn around and start complaining about Devin Pitchford. Like, you know, like, that's what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, is just this coping and seething about Nintendo and the Switch 2. And like, it is very, very remarkable, you know, the lengths that these people will go. And I really, really wonder how much longer it can go on, especially as the Harmon Smith channel continues to grow and become relevant. It won't be very much longer until I have more sway and influence in this community than Arlo. You know, when I'm bigger than, like, any of these, like, grifters over the past several years. Like, we're reaching that point now. You know, my channel is rapidly growing, and the community should fear me, okay? Like, I am vengeance. I am the knight. I am Harmon Smith. And I was right about the Switch 2 sales numbers. You know, it was very, very obvious to me that the cope was just a giant, transparent, just like cope seed. Like, it was obvious to me that this narrative was comprised entirely out of whole cloth. Nothing about it made any sense. There was no evidence. Like, they even had to come out and say that, like, well, it was doing well initially, but over the holiday season, like, the sales completely fell off a cliff. And, like, it was just a giant cope. Like, and that's really all it was. And I really do think we do need to, like, consider all of these like attempts at sabotaging the Switch 2 as being a cope. Right now you're seeing people complaining about price hikes, bro. Like when they raised the price for the Switch 1, they raised it by like $30, okay? Like if they raise the price for the Switch 2, it's only going to be by like, about that much, and if it happens, it wouldn't impact the performance of the sales. Like it's going to be because of market conditions, like everything's getting more expensive. Like that's the new cope right now, is this idea that like Nintendo's going to raise the price for the Switch 2 and that's somehow going to undermine their success. Like like how many times did we hear like going into this that like the Switch 2 was already too expensive, that nobody wanted to buy it, that this was obnoxiously overpriced, and in the end we're seeing like these huge numbers. Like to me, this is and always has been a gigantic cope. To me, like all these people are just desperate to try and keep the narrative going and trying to keep up the illusion of Nintendo failing in order to keep drifting and keep making this like this content. Trying very, 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 very hard to keep up the illusion that Nintendo is perpetually failing, that Nintendo is perpetually on the way out, that Nintendo can't possibly succeed, that they're doomed to fail compared to the almighty gaming PC. They beat Xbox and PlayStation, but oh, well, they can't beat PC. Like, the PC has 1 billion players worldwide. There's nothing Nintendo can do to get people to give them money. Like again, this is the interesting thing we've been seeing, is that, like, the community is so certain that Nintendo is doomed to fail. They're so convinced that Nintendo has no relevancy that they're always constantly surprised whenever something like this happens. Like, they were so surprised at the success of the Switch 2, at the success of, like, games like Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, the success of games like Princess Peach Showtime and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, right? The games like Mario and like Luigi Brothership, right? They were so surprised about these games, and like they still consistently bend over backwards trying to keep up the narrative that like Nintendo is somehow failing, We're at the point now where we have people saying that like Nintendo will never be bigger than James Cameron's Avatar, as if that's like well, first of all, that's not true, and second of all, like if you're comparing Nintendo to Avatar, like wow, like, oh wow, it'll be the second highest grossing film ever. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? That's just the reality of where we're at now. Where like these guys are so desperate to keep up the facade. These guys are so desperate to keep up the grift that they'll tell any lie, they'll make up any story, they'll do whatever it takes. And this is another example. For a month we were told that the Switch 2 was doing poorly in December, and the instant we got actual hardware numbers, that was shown to not only be not true, but the Switch 2 was actually the highest performing piece of hardware in the US that month, And if you're going to blatantly lie to people like that, why exactly would I ever take you seriously?